My name is Evelyn Hartman. I am 30 years old and I live in Seattle. My father didn't even wait until dessert. He slammed his hand on the Thanksgiving table. The china rattled. The whole room went dead silent. He looked right at me, his face red with anger, and shouted so everyone could hear, "Evelyn, you are a useless failure. I am done supporting you. You need to grow up and get out. Go live in the streets for all I care." I looked at my mother. She didn't say a word. She just kept cutting her turkey. Then I looked at my sister, Crystal. She was hiding a nasty little smirk behind her napkin. They all looked at me like I was garbage, like I was nothing. They thought I was broke. They thought I was a burden. But they didn't know the truth. They had no idea that the useless daughter sitting across from them runs a massive tech company. They didn't know I made $25 million this year alone. I stood up. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just grabbed my coat and walked out the door. That was the moment everything changed. They told me to go live in the streets. But 3 weeks later, I was the one holding the deed to their house. But before I tell you how everything flipped, like and subscribe, drop a comment. Where are you watching from? My name is Evelyn Hartman. I am 30 years old. I drove away from that Thanksgiving dinner with my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. The rain was pounding against the windshield, blurring the lights of the other cars, but I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I needed distance. My father's voice was still ringing in my ears. Useless failure. It wasn't the first time he had said something like that. It wasn't even the 100th time. As I drove down the highway, putting miles between me and the house I grew up in, the memories started flooding back. They came in waves, washing over me, cold and heavy. You see, in the Hartman family there were two roles. There was the star and there was the stagehand. My sister, Crystal, was the star. I was the stagehand. I was the one who pulled the curtains, swept the floor, and made sure the lights were on, but I was never, ever supposed to be seen. It started when we were very small. Crystal was 2 years younger than me, but she took up all the space in the room. She was loud, demanding, and according to my mother, spirited. I was quiet. I was observant. My mother called me moody or difficult. I remember my 10th birthday. I had asked for a specific book about computers. I was obsessed with how things worked. I wanted to understand the logic behind the screens. I came down to the kitchen that morning, my heart beating a little fast, hoping for a wrapped gift on the table. There was a gift. It was wrapped in shiny pink paper with a big silver bow. My stomach did a little flip of excitement. I reached for it, but my mother's hand slapped gently onto the table. "No, Evelyn," she said, not even looking up from her coffee. "That's for Crystal." "But it's my birthday," I said. My voice was small. I hated how small my voice was back then. "Crystal had a dentist appointment yesterday and she was very brave," my mother said. "So we got her a little treat. Your gift is in the hallway closet. It's a vacuum cleaner for your room. You need to learn to keep things tidy." Crystal tore open the box. It was a dollhouse, a beautiful, expensive dollhouse. She squealed and ran off to play. I went to the closet and pulled out the vacuum. I spent my 10th birthday vacuuming my room while my parents watched Crystal set up her dolls in the living room. That was the pattern. That was the rule. When we got older, the gap got wider. Crystal wanted violin lessons. My father wrote a check immediately. "She has an artist's soul," he would say, beaming at her while she screeched out off-key notes that made the dog howl. They bought her the best instrument, paid for the best tutors, and drove her 2 towns over for recitals. I wanted to join the coding club at school. It cost $50 for the semester. $50? My father asked, looking at me over his newspaper like I had asked for $1 million. "For what? Sitting in front of a screen. That's not a skill, Evelyn. That's a waste of time. We can't throw money away on your little hobbies." So I didn't join the club. Instead, I went to the library. I read every book they had on programming. I used the free computers during lunch. I taught myself because I knew, deep down, that nobody else was going to teach me. Crystal got tutors for math because she didn't feel like doing her homework. I got chores. "Evelyn, the dishes aren't going to wash themselves," my mother would yell from the living room while she watched TV with Crystal. "Evelyn, go rake the leaves. Your sister is practicing for her pageant." "Evelyn, stop typing on that computer and come help me fold laundry. You need to learn humility. You need to learn how to serve a family." Humility, that was their favorite word for me. They wanted me humble. They wanted me quiet. They wanted me to be the solid, uncomplaining ground that Crystal could walk on. By the time I was 16, I was running the household. I paid the bills. My mother would just hand me the checkbook and tell me to figure it out. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week. I cleaned the bathrooms. I fixed the Wi-Fi when it went down. And what did they think I was doing in my room late at night? They thought I was playing games. They thought I was wasting time. Get off that thing and go to sleep. My father would shout if he saw the glow of my monitor under the door. You're going to rot your brain. They didn't know I was building my first app. They didn't know I was freelancing for a startup in California, lying about my age, and getting paid in Bitcoin because I didn't have a bank account they couldn't access. I remember the day I got my acceptance letter to a top technical university on a full scholarship. I was shaking. It was my ticket out. It was proof that I wasn't useless. I ran into the kitchen, the letter in my hand. Mom, Dad. Look, my mother was on the phone. She held up a finger to silence me. SHH, Crystal is having a crisis. She didn't get the lead role in the school play. My father was pacing the floor, looking worried. It's politics, that's what it is, he was saying. That drama teacher is jealous of Crystal's talent. I stood there for 10 minutes, holding my letter. Finally, my mother hung up. She looked at me annoyed. What is it, Evelyn? Can't you see we're dealing with something important? I got into MIT, I said. Full scholarship. My father blinked. He didn't smile, he didn't cheer, he frowned. MIT, that's in Massachusetts, he said. Who is going to drive Crystal to her rehearsals if you move to Massachusetts? It's a huge opportunity, I said, feeling the joy drain out of me. It's selfish, my mother said, shaking her head. You always just think about yourself. Leaving your family behind just to go look at computers all day. It's cold, Evelyn, you have a cold heart. They didn't come to my high school graduation. Crystal had a migraine that morning, so they stayed home to take care of her. I walked across the stage alone. I heard other families cheering, air horns blasting, parents crying with pride. When they called my name, Evelyn Hartman, there was polite applause, nothing else. I looked out into the crowd, hoping just for a second that maybe they had surprised me. Maybe they were there in the back, but the seats were empty. That was the day I realized I was truly on my own. I went to college. I worked 3 jobs. I sent them money when they asked, which was often. Crystal needs a new car for college, my dad would say. We're a little short this month. I sent it. I always sent it. I thought maybe, if I paid enough, they would finally see me. I thought I could buy their love. But you can't buy something that isn't there. While they were calling me selfish and cold, I was building my second company. By 22, I sold my first software patch for 6 figures. By 25, I had founded the company that now earns me $25 million a year. I never told them. Why? Because I knew what they would do. They wouldn't be proud, they would just want it. They would look at my success and see a bank account for Crystal, so I kept it a secret. I dressed in simple clothes when I visited. I rented a modest car when I drove home. I let them believe I was an administrative assistant at a mid-sized paper company. I let them lecture me about working harder and saving pennies. You should be more like Crystal, my mother told me last Christmas. Crystal was working part-time at a boutique and living in an apartment my parents paid for. She has flair, she has style, you're just very plain, Evelyn. I know, Mom, I said, I know, and now here I was, 30 years old. A multi-millionaire, a CEO, and my father had just told me to go live in the streets because he thought I was a failure. I wiped a tear from my cheek as I merged onto the interstate. The saddest part wasn't the insult. The saddest part was that I wasn't surprised. I had been training for this moment my whole life. I had been the invisible daughter, the backup plan, the punching bag. But as the city skyline faded behind me, a new feeling started to rise up in my chest. It wasn't sadness anymore. It was clarity. They didn't know who I was. They had never known who I was. And for the first time, I realized that was their loss, not mine. It took me 3 hours to drive from my parents' house to my home in Seattle. By the time I arrived, the rain had stopped, leaving the city slick and shining under the streetlights. I pulled my car into the underground garage of my building. It wasn't a rental car this time. It was my car, a sleek, dark gray electric sedan that cost more than my parents' house. I parked in my reserved spot, right next to the elevator. The security guard, Mike, nodded at me as I walked toward the lift. Good evening, Miss Hartman, he said. Rough weather out there. Rough night, Mike, I said quietly. The elevator whisked me up to the top floor, the penthouse. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the entire city and the Puget Sound. The lights of the ferries moving across the black water twinkled like stars. The floors were heated marble. The furniture was Italian leather. It was quiet, clean, and incredibly expensive. This was my reality. This was the life I had built with my own 2 hands, with my useless coding skills and my waste-of-time hobbies. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the island, looking out at the view. It felt surreal. Just hours ago, I was sitting at a scratched wooden table being told I was worthless. Now I was standing in a palace. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I hesitated. I didn't want to look. I knew it was going to be them. Maybe my mother calling to yell at me for walking out. Maybe Crystal sending a nasty text. But I pulled it out anyway. It wasn't them. It was my cousin Lily. Lily was the only person in the family who treated me like a human being. She was kind, but she was also a bit of a gossip. She lived for the family drama. The text was a screenshot. It was a Facebook post. My heart sank as I read the name at the top, Barbara Hartman, my mother. The post read, "Please pray for our family during this difficult time. Our daughter Evelyn has unfortunately lost her way. She left our Thanksgiving dinner in a rage. We have just learned that she is currently homeless and couchsurfing in Seattle, unable to keep a steady job due to her mental instability. We are heartbroken, but we had to show tough love. We hope she finds the help she needs. Number family first, number pray for Evelyn." I stared at the screen. My hands started to shake. Homeless, mental instability. Another text from Lily popped up. "Ev, is this true? Aunt Barb is telling everyone you got fired and you're living in your car. She said you asked them for money and they had to say no because you're on drugs." Drugs. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. I lowered the phone and gripped the marble counter. It wasn't just that they were lying. Families lie sometimes. People exaggerate. But this was a destruction of character. They weren't just covering up the argument. They were actively rewriting my life. I scrolled through the comments on my mother's post. "So sad, Barbara, you did your best. I always knew there was something off about her. Sending love to Crystal. She must be devastated to see her sister like this. Crystal." Of course. I walked over to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. I looked down at the city. I could buy and sell everyone commenting on that post. I ran a company that employed 600 people. I was on the cover of a tech magazine last month, under a profile that didn't show my face because I valued my privacy. And yet, my mother was painting me as a drug-addicted failure. Why? The question gnawed at me. Why would she do this? Why tell everyone I'm homeless? Then, the realization hit me. It was cleaner for them. If I was successful, then their treatment of me was cruel. If I was a millionaire, then their neglect was abuse. But if I was a failure, if I was a homeless drug addict, then they were the victims. They were the long-suffering parents trying to help a troubled child. It justified everything. It justified the tough love. It justified kicking me out. They needed me to be broken so they could feel whole. I felt a tear slide down my nose. It wasn't the lie that hurt. I didn't care what my Aunt Martha or the neighbors thought. It was the fact that my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, would rather destroy my reputation than admit she was wrong. She wanted me to be on the streets. She preferred a version of me that was suffering. I looked around my beautiful, silent apartment. It felt like a fortress now. I typed a reply to Lily. "I'm fine, Lily. I'm safe. Mom is confused. Please don't engage with her." I put the phone down. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the rain hit the windows. For years, I had held onto a tiny hope. A hope that one day I would bring them here. I would invite them to the penthouse. I would cook them a gourmet dinner in this kitchen. I would say, "Look, Mom, look, Dad, I did it. Aren't you proud?" And in my fantasy, they would cry. They would hug me. They would say, "We were wrong, Evelyn, you are amazing." But reading that Facebook post killed that dream. It snapped its neck. They wouldn't be happy for me. If they saw this place, they would hate me for it. They would be jealous. Or worse, they would feel entitled to it. They would try to take it. I realized then that I could never tell them the truth, not in the way I wanted to. The next morning, I went to work. I needed the routine. I needed to feel capable again. I walked into my office building. The receptionist smiled. "Good morning, Miss Hartman." "Good morning, Sarah." I took the private elevator to the 40th floor. My assistant, David, was waiting with coffee and an iPad. "Stocks are up 3%, he said, walking with me to my office. "The merger with the data firm is moving forward. And you have a conference call with Tokyo at 10. Thank you, David, I said. My voice was steady. Here I wasn't the disappointment. Here I was the boss. I sat at my desk and looked at the city below. I felt a strange disconnect. I was two people. To the world, I was a powerful CEO. To my family, I was a homeless failure. I tried to focus on the merger documents, but my mind kept drifting back to the lie. Unable to keep a job, I decided to distract myself. I opened my personal mail. David usually sorted it, but he left the sensitive-looking stuff on my desk. There was a pile of letters, invitations to galas, bank statements, and a thick envelope from a law firm in Portland. I frowned. Portland? My parents lived near Portland. I picked up the envelope. It looked official, heavy paper. I used my letter opener to slice it open. I pulled out the documents. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. It was a notice of default. Dear Miss Hartman, this is a final notice regarding the outstanding debt on the property located at 442 Oak Street. Oak Street. That was the address of Crystal's boutique. The little fashion shop my parents helped her open 2 years ago. I scanned the page. As the guarantor on the loan, you are liable for the remaining balance of $412,000. I froze. Guarantor? I had never signed a loan for Crystal. I had never agreed to be a guarantor. I had refused to give them money for the shop when they asked, telling them it was a bad business model. My eyes raced down the page to the bottom. There on the signature line was my name, Evelyn Hartman. I stared at it. The room went silent. The hum of the air conditioning faded away. I knew that handwriting. It wasn't mine. The E was too loopy. The N at the end trailed off in a straight line. It was my mother's handwriting. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands started to tremble, rattling the paper. They hadn't just lied about me on Facebook. They hadn't just humiliated me at dinner. They had stolen my identity. I sat there in my high-rise office, clutching that piece of paper like it was a bomb, a forged signature. My mind tried to reject it. I tried to come up with an excuse for them. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a different Evelyn Hartman. But the social security number listed under the signature was mine. The address listed was my old P.O. box from 3 years ago, one they knew about. I placed the document flat on my desk and smoothed it out. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, in, out. I looked at the date next to the signature. November 14th, 2 years ago. I closed my eyes and searched my memory. Where was I on November 14th? I checked my digital calendar. I was in London. I was speaking at a tech summit. I wasn't even in the country, let alone in a bank in Oregon, signing a loan for my sister's failing dress shop. The betrayal hit me in a different way this time. The insults at Thanksgiving were emotional. They were painful, but they were just words. This was criminal. This was a felony. My mother, the woman who preached about values and humility, had walked into a bank, pretended to be me, and signed my name to a $400,000 liability. And my father, he must have known. He probably drove her there. And Crystal, the beneficiary of the loan, she definitely knew. They had all conspired to do this. Why? Because they felt entitled to it. I could hear their voices in my head justifying it. Evelyn has a good job, she can handle the risk. We're family, she should help her sister. She's so selfish, she won't give us the money, so we have to take it. They counted on me being passive. They counted on me being the stagehand. They thought that even if I found out, I would be too afraid to do anything. They thought I would just pay it to avoid a scene. They thought I would swallow the debt just like I swallowed their insults. They thought I was weak. I looked at the loan details again. It was a renovation loan, high interest, and it was in default. That meant they hadn't been making payments. If I didn't pay this, my credit would be ruined. The credit I used to secure funding for my companies. The credit I needed to sit on boards of directors. They weren't just stealing from me. They were endangering my entire life's work. They were playing with fire, and they didn't even care if I got burned. I pressed the intercom button on my desk phone. David? Yes, Evelyn. Cancel the Tokyo call. There was a pause. Is everything all right? No, I said. I need you to get the legal team in here, specifically the fraud department, and get me a forensic accountant on the line, now. On it. I hung up. I stood up and walked to the window again. I remembered a conversation from 3 years ago. Crystal had been crying at the dinner table because the bank had denied her business loan. She had no credit history and no income. My father had looked at me. Evelyn, you have good credit. Just co-sign for her. I can't, Dad, I had said. It's too much risk. Most small businesses fail in the first year. I can't have that debt on my name. You're so greedy, Crystal had spat at me. You just want me to fail. I'm not greedy, I'm responsible, I had said. My mother had slammed a pot onto the stove. Fine. If you won't help your family, we'll figure something else out. We always do. We'll figure something else out. I realized now what that meant. They didn't find another lender. They just decided to use me anyway without my permission. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. It wasn't sadness anymore. It wasn't even anger. It was something colder. It was the feeling of a bridge burning. I had spent my whole life trying to build a bridge back to them, trying to be good enough, trying to be worthy. But you don't build bridges to people who rob you. You build walls. My office door opened. It was Robert, my head of legal. He looked concerned. Evelyn, David said it was urgent. I pointed to the document on the desk. My parents forged my signature on a $500,000 loan. It's in default. The bank is coming after me. Robert's eyes went wide. He picked up the paper and adjusted his glasses. He read it quickly, his lawyer face taking over. This is serious, he said. We can fight this easily. You are out of the country, we have flight records, we can prove fraud, we can have the debt discharged from your name. And what happens to the people who signed it? I asked. Robert looked at me over his glasses. If we prove fraud, the bank will file criminal charges. Forgery, identity theft, bank fraud, your parents. They would go to prison, Evelyn. Prison. I imagine my mother in a jumpsuit. My father in handcuffs. Is there another way? I asked. Robert paused. You could pay it, assume the debt voluntarily, but then you lose the money. I don't care about the money, I said. I care about the leverage. I sat back down in my chair. My mind was racing, connecting dots. Robert, I said, if I am the guarantor and the loan is in default, what rights do I have regarding the collateral? Robert flipped to the second page of the document. Let's see, the loan is secured by the property at 442 Oak Street, the boutique. He paused, reading further. And, oh, this is interesting. What? It's cross-collateralized, Robert said. To get the lower interest rate, they put up a secondary asset. He turned the page and pointed. The primary residence. 102 Maple Drive. My breath hitched. 102 Maple Drive. My parents' house. The house I grew up in. The house where my father told me to go live in the streets. They put their house up as collateral, I asked. Yes, Robert said. If this loan isn't paid, the bank takes the shop. If the shop doesn't cover the debt, the bank takes the house. A slow, dark realization spread through me. They were about to lose everything. They hadn't paid the loan. The bank was coming for the shop and the house. And because they had used my name, the bank was coming to me first. So, I said, my voice steady, if I pay off the debt, I step into the shoes of the bank. Robert nodded slowly, understanding where I was going. Technically, yes. If you purchase the debt from the bank, instead of just paying it off as a guarantor, you become the creditor. You would hold the note. You would hold the lien on the shop and the lien on the house. I looked out the window at the gray Seattle sky. They told me to be homeless. They tried to ruin my name. They stole my identity. And now fate had handed me the deed to their shelter. Robert, I said, I want to buy the debt. You want to own your parents' mortgage? Yes, I said. I want to own it all, do it quietly. Use the holding company. Do not let them know it's me, just buy the paper. And then, Robert asked. And then, I said, we proceed with foreclosure. For the next 2 weeks I was a ghost. I didn't answer Crystal's texts asking if I was okay, which were really just fishing expeditions to see if I was suffering. I didn't reply to my mother's Facebook posts. I didn't speak to my father. I stopped seeking their approval. That was the biggest shift. For 30 years, every action I took was filtered through the question, will this make them love me? Now the question was, how do I protect myself? I hired a private investigator to dig deeper. If they forged my signature on this loan, what else had they done? The report came back 3 days later. It was a thick folder. I sat in my living room with a glass of wine and read it. It was worse than I thought. They had opened credit cards in my name when I was in college. They maxed them out and then paid them off slowly using money I sent them, so I never noticed. They had used my social security number to set up the utilities at the boutique. But the biggest revelation was their own finances. They were broke, completely broke. My father had retired 5 years ago, claiming he had made smart investments. The truth was, he had drained his $401,000 to pay for Crystal's wedding, her first one, which lasted 6 months. They had a second mortgage on the house. They had 5 maxed-out credit cards. They were living a champagne life on a beer budget and using my stolen identity to plug the holes in the boat. The loan for the boutique, the $400,000, was gone. The investigator found that only about $100,000 went into the shop renovations. Where did the rest go? A new luxury SUV for my father. A cruise to the Mediterranean for my mother. Consulting fees paid to Crystal. They had stolen $300,000 in my name and spent it on vacations and cars, all while telling me to be humble and calling me greedy. I felt a cold fury. Not the hot, screaming kind of anger. This was the cold, quiet anger of a judge passing a sentence. I looked at the photos in the investigator's file. A picture of my dad in his new car. A picture of my mom on the cruise deck, holding a cocktail. They looked so happy, so carefree. They were spending my money. They were gambling with my credit. And when I finally stood up for myself, they told me to go live in the streets. I picked up my phone and called Robert. "Is the paperwork done?" I asked. "Yes," Robert said. "The bank was happy to offload the toxic debt. They sold it to your holding company, Phoenix LLC, this morning. You now own the note. Do they know?" "No, they just received a notice that their loan has been sold to a new lender. That happens all the time. They won't suspect a thing." "Good," I said. "What is the status of the payments?" "They are 90 days past due," Robert said. "Legally, you can accelerate the loan. You can demand full repayment immediately. If they can't pay, you can seize the assets." "Do it," I said. "Evelyn," Robert said, his voice softening. "Are you sure? This is your family. Once we send this notice, there is no going back. They will lose the shop. They will likely lose the house." I closed my eyes. I thought about the vacuum cleaner on my 10th birthday. I thought about the graduation they skipped. I thought about the Facebook post calling me a drug addict. I thought about the forged signature. I wasn't doing this to be cruel. I was doing this to stop the bleeding. If I didn't stop them, they would keep stealing from me until I was destroyed. They would never stop. They would never learn. The only language they understood was power. "I'm sure," I said. "Send the notice. Demand full payment in 48 hours, or we foreclose." "Understood," Robert said. "I'll send the courier." I hung up the phone. The next day I went into the office, but I couldn't focus. I knew the courier was arriving at their house around noon. I watched the clock. 11:45, 11:50, 11:55. At 12:05 my phone rang. It was my father. I stared at the screen. Dad calling. I let it ring. It stopped. Then it rang again immediately. Then my mother called. Then Crystal. My phone was blowing up. They were panicking. They had just opened the envelope. They had just read that Phoenix LLC was demanding $412,000 immediately or they would lose the house. They had no idea that Phoenix LLC was the daughter they had disowned 3 weeks ago. I turned my phone to silent and placed it face down on the desk. I wasn't going to talk to them. Not yet. I sent a text to Robert. "They are calling, do not answer. Set up a meeting for Friday. Tell them the new lender is willing to meet in person to discuss options." Robert replied, "Done, Friday at 2 p.m. at our offices." "No," I typed. "Rent the conference room at the Bellevue Hotel. Neutral ground. I want them to think they are meeting a corporate banker." "Okay, will you be there?" "Yes," I wrote, "but don't tell them. I want it to be a surprise." I sat back in my chair. The shift was complete. I was no longer the victim. I was the one holding the cards. For the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of them. I was actually looking forward to seeing them. I wanted to see their faces when they realized that the failure was the only thing standing between them and the street. I wanted to see them realize that the useless daughter was the boss. Friday was going to be interesting. The 3 days leading up to the meeting were the longest of my life. I felt like an actor preparing for a final performance. I wasn't Evelyn the daughter anymore. I was Evelyn the CEO of Phoenix LLC. I had to be strategic. If I went into that room angry, I would lose. If I went in crying, they would manipulate me. They knew which buttons to push because they were the ones who installed them. So I had to disconnect the buttons. I met with Robert, my lawyer, every morning. We sat in my office with the rainy Seattle skyline behind us, mapping out every possible scenario. "They are going to beg," Robert warned me on Wednesday. "Your mother will cry, she will talk about her health. Your father will try to intimidate you, he will talk about respect and all he's done for you. And your sister. She will play the victim." "I know," I said. "I've seen this play 1,000 times. But this time is different," Robert said, sliding a thick folder across the desk. This time, you hold the leverage, you need to remember that. You are not their child in that room, you are the creditor. I opened the folder. It contained the foreclosure documents, the evidence of the forged signature, and the asset seizure forms. It was a weapon made of paper. I spent Thursday preparing myself physically. It might sound shallow, but clothes are armor. For years, when I visited them, I wore baggy jeans and old sweaters. I made myself look small so they wouldn't feel threatened. I made myself look poor so they wouldn't ask for more money than they already did. Not this time. I went to my closet and pulled out my power suit. It was a custom-tailored Italian suit, charcoal gray, sharp enough to cut glass. I picked out a pair of black stilettos. I booked a blowout for my hair. I looked in the mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't the stagehand. She wasn't the girl who vacuumed her room on her birthday while her sister played with dolls. She was a woman worth $25 million. She was strong. She was capable. I needed to see that woman, because I knew that as soon as I walked into that room, they would try to turn me back into the little girl they could bully. On the morning of the meeting, I woke up at 5 a.m. I couldn't sleep. I sat on my balcony with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise burn off the fog. I thought about forgiveness. People always tell you to forgive family. Blood is thicker than water, they say. You only get one mother. But what do you do when your blood is poisonous? What do you do when your mother steals from you? I realized that what I was doing wasn't revenge. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is trying to hurt someone because they hurt you. This was protection. If I didn't stop them now, they would bankrupt me. They would drag me down into their mess forever. They had forged my signature once. They would do it again. They would take my house, my company, my peace. I wasn't punishing them. I was evicting them from my life. At 1 p.m., a black town car waited for me downstairs. Robert was already inside. "Ready?" he asked as I slid in. "Ready?" I said. My hands were folded in my lap. They were perfectly still. We drove to the Bellevue Hotel. It was a neutral ground, fancy, intimidating, and public. I wanted them to feel out of place. I wanted them to realize that they were stepping into my world now. As we rode the elevator up to the private conference floor, my heart hammered against my ribs. But my face remained a mask. "Remember," Robert whispered as we approached the heavy oak doors of Conference Room B, "you don't speak until I introduce you. Let them sweat." I nodded. I wasn't Evelyn the daughter today. I was the consequences. The conference room was cold. That was the first thing I noticed. The air conditioning was humming low, and the long mahogany table shone under the bright lights. Robert and I entered through the back door, the one reserved for staff. We took our seats at the head of the table. I turned my high-backed leather chair around so that it faced the wall. I wanted to listen before I looked. At 1:55 p.m., the main doors opened. I heard the concierge speak. "Right this way, Mr. and Mrs. Hartman. The representatives for Phoenix LLC are waiting." I heard their footsteps, my father's heavy, confident stride, my mother's quick, nervous heels, Crystal's shuffling. "This is ridiculous," my father was saying, his voice booming in the quiet room. "Calling us here like criminals. I'm going to give this lender a piece of my mind. We are good people. We just had a cash flow issue." "Just be nice, Frank," my mother hissed. "We need them to extend the loan if they take the house." "They won't take the house," Crystal snapped. "Dad will fix it. Or we'll just call Evelyn again and force her to pay it. She's the guarantor, right? It's her problem." I flinched. Even now, facing ruin, their plan was to use me. They pulled out chairs and sat down. I could hear them shifting, getting comfortable. They saw Robert sitting there, sorting papers. They didn't see me. The back of my chair was a wall between us. "Good afternoon," Robert said. His voice was calm, professional. "I am Robert Sterling, lead counsel for Phoenix LLC. "Mr. Sterling," my father said, putting on his fake businessman voice. "Look, there has been a misunderstanding. We didn't know the loan was sold. We are prepared to make a payment next month. We just need a little grace period." "There is no grace period," Robert said. "The loan is in default. The total amount of $412,000 is due immediately." "That's impossible," my mother cried. "We don't have that kind of money lying around." "Then we proceed with foreclosure," Robert said. "We will seize the commercial property at 442 Oak Street and the residential property at 102 Maple Drive." "You can't take our home," my father shouted. I heard him slam his hand on the table, the same way he did at Thanksgiving. "I have rights, my daughter. My daughter is the guarantor. Go after her. She's the one who signed." "Ah, yes," Robert said. "The guarantor. Evelyn Hartman." Yes, Evelyn, my mother said eagerly. She has a job, she can pay, go garnish her wages, leave us out of it. We have looked into the guarantor, Robert said. And the acquiring party, my client, has a specific interest in that aspect of the case. Your client? Crystal asked. Who is your client? I want to speak to the manager. I want to speak to the owner of this debt. The owner is here, Robert said. That was my cue. I took a deep breath. I placed my hands on the armrests, and I slowly swiveled the chair around. The silence that followed was absolute. My father's mouth hung open. My mother froze, her hand halfway to her mouth. Crystal blinked, her face contorted in confusion. I sat there looking at them. I was wearing my charcoal suit. My hair was perfect. I looked nothing like the daughter they had screamed at 3 weeks ago. I looked like the person who owned them. Hello, Dad, I said. My voice was steady. Hello, Mom. Evelyn, my mother whispered. She looked at Robert, then back at me. What are you doing here? Did they call you too? She isn't here as a witness, Mrs. Hartman, Robert said coldly. Miss Hartman is the owner of Phoenix LLC. She bought your debt this morning. She is the acquiring party. My father's face turned a deep, violent purple. You bought the loan. Yes, I said. I bought it, which means you don't owe the bank anymore. You owe me. Crystal laughed. It was a nervous, high-pitched sound. You're homeless. Mom said you were living in your car. You don't have $400,000. I looked at Crystal. I bought the debt for cash, Crystal. And I paid the legal fees to prove the fraud. I slid the paper across the table, the one with the forged signature. I know I didn't sign this, I said. And now I have the forensic evidence to prove it. My mother went pale. She slumped back in her chair. So here is the situation, I continued, clasping my hands on the table. You forged my signature, you stole my identity, you defaulted on the loan. And now I hold the deed to your house. You wouldn't, my father growled. He stood up, trying to loom over me. I am your father, you ungrateful little. Sit down, I said. I didn't shout. I just projected my voice, sharp and commanding. He blinked. He wasn't used to me giving orders. He sat down. You have 2 options, I said. Option A, I report the fraud to the police. You and Mom go to prison for identity theft and bank fraud. The house is seized by the state. I paused. I let the word prison hang in the air. Option B, I continued. You sign the house over to me today, voluntary foreclosure. You sell the boutique to liquidate the assets, and you move out. Move out, my mother sobbed. But it's our home. Where will we go? I don't know, I said. Maybe you can go live in the streets. The words landed like stones. My father flinched. He remembered. You can't do this, Crystal screamed. You're ruining my life. The boutique is my dream. Your dream was funded by my nightmare, I said. It's over, Crystal. I leaned forward. Choose, I said. Prison. Or the house. The room descended into chaos. Crystal was hysterical. She stood up and threw her water glass against the wall. It shattered, water splashing onto the expensive carpet. I hate you. I always knew you were jealous of me. You just want to destroy me because Mom and Dad love me more. Crystal, sit down, Robert barked. Security guards took a step forward from the back of the room. Crystal saw them and shrank back into her seat, sobbing. My mother started the guilt trip. It was her go-to move. She reached across the table, trying to grab my hand. I pulled it away. Evelyn, honey, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face, tears that I knew were only for herself. Please, we're your family. We raised you. We put a roof over your head. Doesn't that mean anything? How can you be so cold? We made a mistake, yes, but we did it for the family. We did it for Crystal. You did it for Crystal, I repeated. Yes, you always do it for Crystal. But you used my name, you used my credit, you risked my future. We knew you could handle it, she cried. You're so smart, Evelyn. You always figure things out. We thought you wouldn't mind helping your sister. Helping? I asked. Helping is when you ask. Stealing is when you take. My father, realizing that shouting wasn't working, tried a different tactic. He tried to be the patriarch. He straightened his tie and looked at me with a disappointed frown. This is beneath you, Evelyn, he said sternly. A daughter does not sue her father. A daughter does not evict her mother. You are embarrassing yourself. You are being vindictive. Now, sign those papers over to us, forgive the debt, and we can go home and forget this ever happened. I'm willing to forgive you for this. Stunt. I stared at him. He was willing to forgive me. Something inside me snapped. Not in a loud way, but the last thread of attachment I had to them finally broke. You're willing to forgive me? I asked quietly. Yes, he said, nodding magnanimously. We can put this behind us. I stood up. You told me to go live in the streets, I said. My voice was low, but it filled the room. At Thanksgiving, in front of Aunt Martha, Uncle Bob, the cousins, you looked me in the eye and told me I was useless. I was angry, he dismissed. I didn't mean it. You meant it, I said. You meant it because you thought I was poor, you thought I had no power, you thought I was a failure, so you threw me away like trash. I walked around the table until I was standing right behind Crystal. She wouldn't look at me. And you, I said to my mother. You went on Facebook and told the world I was a drug addict. You told people I was homeless. Why? To cover your own tracks. To make yourself look like a martyr. My mother looked down at her lap. I didn't do this to you, I said, looking at all three of them. You did this to yourselves. You taught me this. You taught me that money is the only thing that matters in this family. You taught me that if you aren't the star, you're nothing. I walked back to my chair and picked up the contract. Well, I said, I'm not nothing anymore. And I'm not the stagehand, I'm the bank. I dropped the pen on the table in front of my father. Sign the deed, I said, or Robert calls the district attorney. I have the number on speed dial. It's your choice. 5 minutes. My father looked at the pen. He looked at my mother. She was sobbing into her hands. He looked at Crystal, who was staring at the wall, defeated. He realized finally that he had lost. He realized that the daughter he ignored was the only one who had actually built something real. His hand shook as he picked up the pen. You're a cruel woman, Evelyn, he spat. I'm a businesswoman, Dad, I replied. And this is a foreclosure, he signed. The next week was a blur of logistics. My parents chose to sell. They didn't want to rent from me. Their pride wouldn't allow it. They couldn't stomach the idea of writing a rent check to their failure daughter every month. So they packed. I didn't go to the house while they were moving. I sent movers. I paid for them, one last act of charity. I didn't want to watch them put their lives into boxes. Crystal's boutique closed immediately. Without the unlimited funding from the fraudulent loan, she couldn't pay the vendors. She tried to go on Instagram and blame corporate greed for shutting her down, but nobody really cared. She moved in with her boyfriend in a cramped apartment on the south side. My parents downsized. They found a small 2-bedroom rental in a retirement community about an hour away. It was beige, generic, and small. No more dinner parties, no more showing off. Robert handled the closing. I took possession of the house, 102 Maple Drive, on a Tuesday afternoon. I drove there alone. The house was empty. The driveway was clear. I walked up the front steps, the same steps I had walked up 1,000 times carrying groceries or school books. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like lemon pledge and old memories. The furniture was gone. The walls were bare. The outlines of where the pictures used to hang were visible on the paint, ghost squares of a family that didn't exist anymore. I walked into the kitchen. I stood in the spot where my father had yelled at me. I stood in the spot where my mother had given Crystal the dollhouse. I thought I would feel sad. I thought I would cry. I waited for the grief to hit me, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt light. I walked through the living room. I walked up the stairs to my old bedroom. It was tiny. The carpet was worn. This was the room where I taught myself to code. This was the room where I planned my escape. I opened the window and let the fresh air in. They were gone. The noise, the criticism, the demands, the lies, it was all gone. I had my credit back. I had my name back, and I had the house. I took out my phone and called a real estate agent I knew. Hello, Evelyn. Hi, Sarah, I said. I have a property I want to list, 102 Maple Drive. Oh, lovely area. What are you looking to get for it? I don't care about the price, I said. Just sell it quickly. I want it gone. And Sarah, donate the proceeds to a charity. A charity? Which one? Programs for at-risk youth, I said, specifically for kids who get kicked out of their homes. That's very generous, Evelyn. It's not generosity, I said, looking around the empty room one last time. It's closure. I walked out of the house and locked the door. I left the key under the mat for the agent. I didn't look back as I walked to my car. I wasn't an orphan, but I wasn't a daughter anymore either. I was free. It was raining again in Seattle. It always seems to rain when my life changes. I was back in my penthouse, standing on the balcony. The city lights were glowing through the mist. It had been 3 months since the confrontation. I hadn't spoken to them since the meeting. Lily told me they were telling people I had tricked them out of their house, that I was a ruthless corporate shark. I let them talk. The truth was in the legal documents. The truth was in my bank account. The truth was in the silence of my apartment. I sipped my tea and looked at my reflection in the glass door. I used to think that love meant enduring pain. I thought that if I just took enough abuse, if I just worked hard enough to please them, eventually they would love me back. But I learned the hard way that you can't earn love from people who are incapable of giving it. And you can't save people who are determined to drown you. My father told me to go live in the streets. He wanted me to be powerless. He wanted me to be a victim. Instead, I became the owner. I didn't do it out of hate. I did it because I finally loved myself enough to say stop. I put my hand on the cold railing. The wind whipped my hair around my face. I felt strong. I felt steady. There is a quiet power in walking away. There is a victory in refusing to play the role they wrote for you. I turned away from the view and walked back into my warm, beautiful home. My home, the one I bought, the one I earned, the one where nobody yells and nobody lies. I sat down at my computer. I opened a new document. I started to write this story, because I know I'm not the only one. I know there are other stagehands out there, other invisible daughters and scapegoated sons. People who are holding the weight of their families on their backs, waiting for a thank you that will never come. If that's you, I want you to know something. You don't owe them your life. You don't owe them your happiness. And you certainly don't owe them your credit score. You can walk away. You can build your own empire. And you can find a family that chooses you, not one that uses you. I saved myself. You can too. If my story resonated with you, and if you've ever had to cut ties to save your sanity, please subscribe. I'll be sharing more about how I rebuilt my life and the lessons I learned along the way. You are not alone.